No one saw it coming. Not the astronomers watching the cold edges of the solar system. Not the defense networks that never slept. Not even the explorers who had spent their entire lives mapping the dark, empty reaches between the stars. For centuries, Earth had looked outward, searching, listening, waiting for a sign that we weren't alone. And then one quiet night, something answered. It started as a flicker, barely a whisper on deep space radar. A strange, shifting signature that seemed to appear and vanish between seconds, like light bending around an invisible curve. At first, it was dismissed as a glitch, maybe a fragment of debris tumbling through the void. But within hours, every observatory on Earth was locked onto the anomaly. The readings made no sense. It wasn't a natural object, and it wasn't drifting. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, toward the inner system. When the first clear image came through, the world stopped. It wasn't a comet, or an asteroid, or a ship like anything we had ever imagined. It was colossal, stretching across hundreds of kilometers, casting its own shadow across the void. A structure so immense that it dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. And stamped across its dark metallic surface was something that made the blood run cold. Symbols. Ancient, geometric, eerily familiar. Within days, every government, military, and private research group was scrambling to understand what it was. Some called it a derelict, a relic of an extinct civilization. Others whispered that it was a weapon, a supercarrier built for war. The name stuck. Earth's hidden supercarrier. But if it had been hidden, then the real question was, by who? Theories spread like wildfire. Some claimed it was ours, a lost human project from before the collapse. Others believed it was alien, left behind eons ago, watching silently until now. But one thing was certain. It had awakened. In orbit above Mars, Commander Rian stood at the viewport of the science vessel Atlas, watching the black horizon. The supercarrier hung there, a silent silhouette against the stars, its hull absorbing every wavelength of light like a void made solid. They had been ordered to hold distance, observe, scan, record, but not engage. That command was starting to feel impossible. "It's not just metal," one of the engineers whispered, voice trembling over the comms. "The scans. They're reading it like it's alive." Every hour, the Atlas sent back terabytes of data to Earth. Strange energy fluctuations, radiation patterns that changed like breathing, structures within the carrier rearranging themselves, almost as if the ship was thinking. On Earth, the world was divided. Half the population celebrated, calling it proof of higher life. The other half prepared for war. Governments deployed fleets. Satellites formed defensive nets. For the first time in history, every nation agreed on one thing. Whatever that thing was, it was far beyond human comprehension. And then came the signal. It hit every receiver at once, a pulse that rattled every system, every satellite, every implant and data node. A message, encoded in a frequency older than any known language. No one could translate it. No one could even agree if it was a warning or a greeting. For the next 72 hours, nothing moved. The supercarrier remained still, a sleeping giant floating in the silence. Then, without warning, a section of its outer hull unfolded like a mechanical flower. Inside was a hangar, massive enough to swallow a moon base. And within it, light. A single glowing core pulsing in steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Commander Ryan's team was the first to send a drone inside. It disappeared within minutes. The signal was cut off instantly. But before it went dark, it transmitted a single image, an image that burned itself into the minds of everyone who saw it. Rows upon rows of structures lined the hangar walls. They weren't machines or weapons. They were pods. And inside each one, faintly illuminated by that impossible light, was a shape. Human. The discovery hit harder than any explosion. If those were people, how long had they been there? And who had put them inside? Back on Earth, panic and fascination collided. Theories turned to chaos. Some believed they were ancient humans, our ancestors preserved by some forgotten technology. Others said they were copies, replicas made by something that had studied us from afar. The scientists at Lunar Command found another layer of the signal, an encoded map. A pattern that traced across the stars, pointing to coordinates far beyond known space. It was as if the ship was inviting us to follow, or daring us to. Despite the risks, a decision was made. Humanity couldn't turn away. The Atlas and 3 other vessels formed a small expeditionary fleet. Their mission: approach the carrier, breach the interior, and uncover the truth. When Ryan's team finally crossed the threshold, their instruments went wild. Gravity shifted, time seemed to slow, and sound became distorted, as if reality itself was bending. Inside, the corridors shimmered with strange patterns, carved with the same symbols found on the hull. The walls were alive with light, pulsing like veins. It wasn't just a ship. It was a being. As they moved deeper, the crew began to feel it, a presence, ancient and aware. Something was watching them, not through cameras or sensors, but through the very structure of the ship. Every movement echoed, every breath seemed amplified, as though the carrier was listening. Then the voice came. It wasn't sound exactly. It vibrated through their bones, through their thoughts. A language no one could understand, yet somehow everyone felt its meaning. Return. The lights along the corridor flared, guiding them forward. The air thickened, charged with energy. Ryan raised a hand to stop the team, but it was too late. The floor beneath them shifted, forming a ramp that led down toward a vast chamber. And there, in the center, floated a sphere of light. Within it, the faint outline of a human figure. For a moment, no one moved. The figure's eyes opened, calm, ageless, filled with something that looked too familiar to be alien. "Welcome back," it said. The voice was soft, but it carried the weight of centuries. The crew stared in disbelief, unable to speak. The ship around them began to hum, its energy surging as though awakening from a long slumber. Outside, the stars themselves seemed to flicker in response. On Earth, every system monitoring the Supercarrier lit up with activity. Massive energy spikes rippled across space, powerful enough to distort communications and warp nearby gravity fields. The carrier was no longer dormant. It was alive and reacting to something. And then, in the middle of all the chaos, the carrier began to move. Slowly, gracefully, it turned its colossal frame away from the sun. Its engines, if they could even be called that, flared with blinding light. The trajectory data made no sense. It wasn't leaving the solar system. It was aligning with something just beyond Pluto, something that had been hidden there all along. As the fleet scrambled to respond, Commander Ryan's last transmission echoed across every channel. "It's not coming to Earth. It's going home." And with that, the feed went dark. Silence. The world waited, breath held, staring into the endless night, at the place where the stars had just begun to move. Because if Earth's hidden supercarrier was only one of them, then the question wasn't what woke it up. The question was, what else was about to awaken next? The days that followed were filled with silence and questions no one could answer. The supercarrier had vanished beyond Pluto's orbit, leaving behind a trail of distorted space-time and a dozen missing ships, including the Atlas. Every transmission had cut off the moment the carrier moved. No distress signals, no debris, nothing. It was as if the entire fleet had been swallowed whole. Back on Earth, panic began to simmer under the surface. News outlets repeated the same headline for weeks. Earth's hidden supercarrier disappears beyond the solar frontier. Governments denied involvement, though everyone knew they were holding secret meetings, trying to figure out whether the ship had been alien or human. and if it was coming back. The United Earth Council formed an emergency division known as the Deep Space Recovery Initiative. Their mission was simple in words, but impossible in scope: find the carrier and recover any surviving crew. But the truth was, no one knew where to even begin looking. In a remote facility under the ice sheets of Antarctica, a scientist named Iden spent his nights reviewing the last transmission from the Atlas. He wasn't military, but he'd been pulled into the investigation because he had been one of the few people studying the strange symbols that covered the carrier's hull. Symbols that seemed ancient, but somehow mirrored patterns found in human cave art dating back tens of thousands of years. Iden watched the final seconds of the transmission again and again. The glowing figure, the words, "Welcome back," and the moment when the light swallowed the crew. There was something in that moment, something he couldn't quite define. Not fear, not destruction, something else. Recognition. The data fragments pulled from the Atlas's last signal showed a strange energy signature, almost biological. It pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and rhythmic. The same frequency, he discovered, could be found in the human body, specifically in brainwave patterns during deep REM sleep. That discovery sent shock waves through the research division. If the ship's core emitted a signal similar to human brain activity, what did that mean? Was it alive, or connected to humanity in some way that defied explanation? Meanwhile, strange things began happening across the planet. Power grids flickered. Communication satellites glitched. Space telescopes picked up faint bursts of the same signal that came from the carrier, but weaker, like distant echoes. And then people began dreaming about it. At first, no one believed the reports, but they spread quickly. Thousands of people across different continents describing the same dream. A dark sky filled with shifting light, a vast structure emerging from the stars, and a single phrase whispered through the void: "Return home." The scientists dismissed it as coincidence, a psychological reaction to the global obsession with the missing ship. But Iden wasn't convinced. He started running neurological studies on volunteers who claimed to have had the dream. What he found unsettled him. Their brainwaves matched the same frequency as the signal from the Supercarrier. It wasn't coincidence. Something was reaching out. In orbit around Jupiter, a deep space probe picked up a sudden gravitational distortion. The readings were faint, but familiar, the same kind that had preceded the carrier's appearance months earlier. The probe sent back a brief data packet before being torn apart by the force. When analysts decoded the packet, one image stood out, a faint silhouette, massive and unmistakable. The carrier had returned, but it wasn't alone. Behind it, smaller objects drifted in perfect formation. They weren't debris or asteroids, they were ships. Dozens of them, sleek and dark, each radiating the same energy signature. They followed the Supercarrier like guardians or an escort fleet, and all of them were heading toward the outer system. Iden was summoned to Lunar Command to analyze the new data. When he arrived, the control room was in chaos. Officers shouting orders, screens flashing red, communications breaking under the pressure of interference. In the center of it all, a holographic display showed the massive ship slowly crossing into sensor range. "It's broadcasting again," one of the technicians said. "Same frequency, same modulation, but it's changing." Iden leaned forward, listening to the deep hum that filled the room. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was layered, patterned, almost musical. "It's not a signal," he murmured. "It's language." The council debated whether to respond. Some argued it was a trap. Others believed it was a plea. But before they could decide, the carrier sent something unexpected, a transmission directed specifically at Earth. It wasn't in words, but in images. Millions of people across the planet saw them simultaneously. Screens, devices, even neural implants flashed with the same visions. Cities burning under alien skies, oceans rising, stars collapsing, and in the center of it all, the supercarrier floating in silence, surrounded by thousands of human figures. The message was clear, even if no one could explain it. Whatever this ship was, it carried memories. Our memories. The images triggered another global wave of dreams. This time, they were clearer. People saw fragments of another world, one that looked like Earth, but older, purer, untouched by cities or machines. They saw humans, real humans, walking beneath twin suns, building something vast in orbit. A fleet. It was as if the universe itself was reminding humanity of something it had forgotten. Iden began to piece together a theory that many dismissed as madness. What if humanity hadn't originated on Earth at all? What if the carrier wasn't alien, but a remnant of a civilization that had once called the stars home? Maybe Earth wasn't the beginning, but the exile. The idea spread through underground networks faster than officials could contain it. People began to whisper that the carrier wasn't here to attack, but to bring humanity back to where it came from, to awaken something long dormant within us. Still, not everyone believed. Military fleets gathered near Jupiter, preparing for confrontation. The carrier and its escorts didn't respond, simply holding position as if waiting. Then the energy spikes began. The supercarrier's hull started to glow faintly, lines of light running across its surface like veins coming alive. Earth's magnetic field fluctuated, causing auroras to bloom across the entire sky, even at the equator. Every compass spun aimlessly, every radio filled with static and a single repeating pulse. Iden listened to that pulse for hours until he finally recognized the pattern. It wasn't random. It matched human DNA sequences, repeated over and over. The ship was broadcasting life itself. Across the world, strange new anomalies began to appear. Tiny rifts of light hovering in midair like doorways that didn't lead anywhere. They pulsed in rhythm with the carrier's signal. The first explorers who approached them reported hearing whispers, seeing flashes of stars and feeling weightless, as if gravity had briefly lost hold. By the time the phenomenon reached the moon, panic had turned to awe. Humanity stood at the edge of something vast, and no one could decide whether it was salvation or extinction. One night, as Iden stared out from the lunar base, he saw it. A faint glimmer near the horizon, a reflection that shouldn't have been there. He magnified the image. The carrier was no longer beyond Jupiter. It was moving closer, slowly, purposefully. Its escorts followed in perfect formation, each one aligning like a constellation being drawn into shape. And at its center, the same light that had spoken through dreams now burned brighter than ever. Back on Earth, people began to feel it again, that pull. The dreams became stronger, voices clearer. Some began walking into the glowing rifts, vanishing without a trace. No bodies, no signals, just gone. The governments tried to stop it, but how do you stop billions from following what feels like destiny? As the ship drew nearer, the stars behind it seemed to fade, swallowed by the light. Iden knew it wasn't just coming closer. It was opening something. A gate, a bridge, maybe a memory made real. He couldn't shake the feeling that the words "welcome back" hadn't been meant for the Atlas crew at all. They were meant for humanity itself. But what were they being welcomed back to? The instruments began to spike again. Power readings beyond measurable range. Lunar Command scrambled to evacuate, and in the final transmission before systems overloaded, the carrier's light flared once more, flooding the entire solar system with brilliance. Through that light came a final message, clear this time, spoken in perfect human language. "You left us behind, but we remember." And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the light vanished. The stars returned. The sky was empty once more. But every receiver, every instrument, every human mind still echoed with that single pulse, steady, rhythmic, alive. Somewhere, in the darkness beyond the edge of the system, the supercarrier waited, watching. and Earth was no longer sure who had been the first to find whom. No one could agree on what had just happened. One moment, the skies had been filled with that blinding light. The next, everything was quiet again. The stars were back, the power grids were stable, and for a brief instant, the world almost believed it had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, everyone knew something fundamental had changed. The readings didn't lie. Every sensor across the planet, from orbital satellites to deep ocean detectors, showed the same impossible pattern. The Supercarrier hadn't disappeared. It had shifted. Not gone, just somewhere else. Somewhere close, but unseen. Iden hadn't slept in days. The message, those 4 haunting words, played on a loop in his head. You left us behind. It wasn't just a statement. It was an accusation, a reminder. But of what? Humanity had never known any other home but Earth. At least that was what everyone believed. The Council tried to keep control. They issued statements assuring the public that everything was under control, that research teams were analyzing the event. But the truth leaked quickly. Civilian astronomers noticed strange distortions in the night sky, like ripples moving through space itself. Whole constellations seemed to shift ever so slightly, as though the stars were rearranging themselves into a pattern only the Supercarrier could understand. Meanwhile, people across the world continued to vanish, always near those strange rifts of light, always after claiming they had heard a voice calling to them in their dreams. It wasn't happening in one place or one nation. It was global. Millions reported the same dream, standing before a massive gate of light with a shadowed figure waiting beyond it, whispering the same word over and over. Return. The governments began to turn on each other. The United Earth Council fractured into factions, some demanding to destroy whatever the carrier had unleashed, others believing they should surrender to it. On the moon, the research stations became fortresses, each one hoarding data and refusing to share. The quiet cooperation humanity had built for decades dissolved overnight. Iden's work took a darker turn. He wasn't supposed to, but he began working with a small team outside official channels. Scientists, engineers, even a few pilots who had lost loved ones to the rifts. They called themselves the Remnant. Their belief was simple. The carrier wasn't here to destroy humanity. It was trying to remind it of something it had forgotten. Among them was a communications officer named Lyra. She had been on the Atlas before it vanished, but had been reassigned just days before launch. She still carried a small holotag of the crew, refusing to accept they were gone. Lyra was quiet, thoughtful, but sharp. She was the one who noticed that the signal pulsing through the planet wasn't random anymore. It was evolving. Each time the Supercarrier pulsed, the signal changed in subtle ways. Lyra discovered that it wasn't a single transmission, it was layered, like a conversation happening across multiple frequencies. And the more they analyzed it, the clearer it became that the signal was directed at humanity's technology itself. Devices began to act strange, responding to the signal in unpredictable ways. Drones powered themselves on without batteries. Old data archives unlocked on their own, revealing fragments of encrypted code that no one remembered creating. The strange part was that the code wasn't alien. It was human, written in forgotten programming languages that hadn't been used in centuries. It was as if the carrier was unlocking pieces of humanity's own history, scattered and buried within its digital memory. Lyra ran one of the decryption protocols one night, ignoring Iden's warnings. The code unraveled into a visual sequence, images of vast ships leaving an unknown world, engines burning white against the dark. A voice spoke faintly over the static, too distorted to understand, but one word came through clearly: Genesis. When she showed it to Iden, he felt his stomach drop. The theory he had been too afraid to say aloud now stared him in the face. The Supercarrier wasn't alien. It was human technology, ancient, a remnant from before recorded history. Somehow, long ago, humanity had been among the stars. The revelation spread among the remnant. but they kept it quiet. If the council knew, it would trigger mass hysteria. Already there were rumors that some world leaders were preparing to evacuate into orbit, fearing the carrier might reappear over Earth. But what no one realized was that it already had. It began with a flicker in the night sky over the Pacific Ocean. Then a deep vibration rolled across the atmosphere, shaking the oceans, knocking out satellites. Moments later, every deep-sea sensor picked up an impossible reading, a gravitational anomaly forming beneath the water. Something vast was surfacing. Cameras captured only fragments, waves rising hundreds of meters high, light shimmering through the depths, and then a shadow, darker than night, emerging from beneath the ocean. The carrier wasn't in space anymore. It was here, floating above the water like a silent, impossible mountain. Panic consumed the planet. Evacuations began across coastal regions, and every global defense fleet took position, though no one dared fire first. The carrier did nothing, just hovered, silent and unmoving as storms gathered around it. Iden and Lyra were flown to a command station in orbit, tasked with interpreting the signal coming from the ship. What they found chilled them. The frequency wasn't just transmitting outward, it was resonating inward, syncing with the human nervous system. It was as if the ship was tuning itself to humanity's collective pulse. While they worked, another signal emerged, this one hidden deep beneath the primary transmission. It wasn't coming from the carrier, it was coming from Earth itself, buried beneath the planet's crust, thousands of kilometers down. A perfect echo of the carrier's frequency, as if something had been waiting here all along. The discovery split the team. Some believed it meant the carrier had been here before, leaving something behind. Others thought it was a call, a beacon summoning its counterpart. Whatever the truth, the readings showed one terrifying fact. The signal beneath the Earth was growing stronger. Meanwhile, people began to change. Those who had experienced the dreams started to show strange neurological patterns. Their brain waves aligned perfectly with the carrier's frequency. They spoke of hearing voices when they closed their eyes, of seeing cities made of light in their dreams. Some began to draw symbols, patterns identical to the carvings found on the Supercarrier's hull. Governments called it a mass delusion. But when some of those people began to emit electromagnetic interference strong enough to disrupt nearby electronics, denial became impossible. It was as if humanity itself was evolving or reverting. Lyra, too, began to feel it. The same dreams, the same pull toward the light. She confessed to Iden that she could hear whispers in the static when they analyzed the signal. Not random noise, but words. Fragments of sentences in her own voice. It terrified her and fascinated her. One night, when everyone else had gone, she stood at the observation window of the orbital station, staring at the Earth far below. The clouds glowed faintly from the carrier's reflection, a silent giant watching over the world like a memory that refused to fade. She turned to Iden, her voice barely above a whisper. What if it's not coming for us to fight it? What if it's coming because we called it back? Iden didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down, he felt the same thing she did, that this wasn't invasion or salvation, it was reunion, and maybe humanity wasn't ready for it. The next morning, the carrier moved. Slowly, it began to rise through the clouds, light spilling from its underbelly, and as it ascended, every rift of light across the planet began to open wider. The same energy reading appeared on every monitor. The same message flashed across every system. Initiation sequence active. No one knew what it meant, but the last time something like this had happened, a civilization had vanished. As the sky burned with shifting light and the oceans shimmered with reflections of something far beyond comprehension, Iden realized that humanity's greatest mystery wasn't out there among the stars. It was buried deep within itself, waiting to be remembered. And somewhere inside that colossal ship, something or someone was awakening. The entire planet trembled as the carrier rose higher into the sky. Lightning danced across its enormous frame, flashing against the dark clouds that gathered around it. Oceans heaved, winds howled, and still the ship moved in perfect silence. Around the world, billions watched from their screens, standing in the streets, frozen between fear and wonder. Humanity had never seen anything so immense or so alive. Every transmission, every broadcast, every radar scan locked onto the ship as it ascended through the atmosphere. But something else was happening. The rifts, the glowing portals that had appeared across the planet, were widening. What had once looked like rippling light was now deep, endless space, like windows to another universe. Through them, faint shapes could be seen, structures, towers, maybe even ships, moving in the shadows beyond. Iden stood inside the orbital station's control deck, staring at the wall of data flooding the screens. His eyes were hollow from sleepless nights, his hands trembling over the console. "It's not leaving," he murmured. "It's aligning." The readings confirmed it. The carrier wasn't escaping Earth's gravity. It was synchronizing with something, an energy field surrounding the planet. Every second, the pulse from its core grew stronger, resonating with that buried signal deep beneath the crust. Lyra joined him at the viewport. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with a strange calm. "You can feel it, can't you?" she whispered. He didn't answer, but he could. It wasn't sound or vibration. It was something deeper, a steady hum in his bones, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. Every human on the station felt it now, that quiet pull that made them feel both terrified and homesick. Across the solar system, the consequences spread. Jupiter's magnetic field flared. Saturn's rings vibrated as though struck by an invisible force. Even distant probes near Neptune sent distorted readings, waves of light rippling through space-time. The carrier's energy wasn't just affecting Earth, it was rewriting the physics of the system itself. The Council's final order came through. Prepare all defenses. Every orbital weapon, every satellite, every ship still operational was armed and aimed at the supercarrier. No one wanted to fire, but fear was stronger than caution. Humanity's last instinct had always been to survive even when it didn't understand what it was fighting. As the fleets assembled, Iden's team worked frantically to decode the signal now repeating through every channel. It wasn't just words, it was coordinates. The numbers pointed not to another planet, but directly toward Earth's core. "What's buried down there?" Lyra asked quietly. Iden stared at the data in disbelief. Something old, something that was never supposed to wake up. Before he could explain further, the ship outside began to change. Sections of its hull rotated, massive plates sliding open to reveal intricate machinery beneath. A deep, resonant tone filled the air, vibrating through the entire station. Energy arcs burst across the surface, lighting up the night side of Earth like a second sun. The carrier was activating. Every screen flickered as data overload crashed the systems. When they came back online, a new message appeared, flashing in steady rhythm. Genesis sequence, Phase 1. Panic erupted across every channel. Fleets repositioned, weapons charged, countdowns began. But Iden shouted over the alarms. "Don't fire! If we interrupt it, we could destroy everything!" No one listened. Orders came down from the Council. Detonate if the carrier crossed low orbit. Humanity's greatest fear had finally taken form, and now it hovered above them, unstoppable. But then something unexpected happened. The ship didn't attack. Instead, it projected a massive beam of light downward, piercing the atmosphere. The beam reached deep into the Earth, straight toward the signal beneath the surface. The ground began to quake. Volcanoes erupted across the planet. Oceans rose. Cities trembled as if the planet itself was alive. Lyra gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white. It's waking whatever's down there. The data pouring in was chaotic. Seismic readings, magnetic distortions, gravitational shifts, every measurement went beyond what was physically possible. In the middle of the chaos, one image flickered onto the screen, a hollow, metallic chamber deep beneath the surface, larger than any structure humanity had ever built. Inside it, something massive began to move. Aiden stared in horror. "There's another one," he whispered. "Another carrier, buried inside the Earth." The realization spread like wildfire. The supercarrier above wasn't an intruder. It was a key, unlocking its twin that had been hidden beneath humanity's feet for millennia. Across the planet, people collapsed as the dreams returned stronger than ever. Millions fell unconscious, whispering the same phrase in unison. "We are returning." Aiden felt it too. A pressure building in his mind, visions flashing behind his eyes. He saw a world of twin suns, vast cities suspended in the clouds, fleets of ships leaving their home to escape something unseen. He saw a promise, one civilization vowing to return one day to rebuild what had been lost. Then he saw darkness and a single ship drifting into the void, the Supercarrier. When the vision faded, alarms blared through the control deck. The second signal, the one from beneath Earth, was now active. The ground split open in fault lines across continents. Massive electromagnetic storms swallowed the skies. Power grids failed worldwide. Through the chaos, Aiden turned to Lyra. "We have to shut it down before the resonance completes. If both ships fully synchronize, the energy release could tear the planet apart." "But how?" she asked, her voice breaking. "There's one way," he said. "We interrupt the core's frequency. We have to get inside the carrier." No one had ever tried to board it since the Atlas vanished. But now there was no choice. The carrier was lowering toward the planet again, descending slowly through the clouds. Its light cut through the darkness like a beacon, shining directly over the Pacific. Aiden and Lyra joined the emergency launch. Their shuttle trembled as it entered the storm, lightning flashing around them. From the window, the carrier looked endless, a mountain of metal and light, pulsing with energy like a living heart. As they approached, a sudden voice echoed through the comms. Static first, then words, soft, calm, impossibly familiar. "Aiden, you've come home." Lyra froze. That's the same voice from the transmission. The shuttle's instruments flickered, and then the carrier opened a path. A section of the hull unfolded, revealing a glowing tunnel leading inward. The ship was inviting them in. Against every instinct, they entered. Inside, gravity twisted. Light bent. The air shimmered with static. The corridors pulsed with the same rhythm as the signal. It was like walking inside a heartbeat. Deeper they went, guided by unseen energy. The ship seemed to know where they were going before they did. Finally, they reached the core chamber, a vast space filled with light and motion, and at its center, a figure stood waiting. It looked human, too human. The same shape, the same face as the holographic image from the Atlas's last transmission. Eyes glowing faintly, voice steady. "You shouldn't have forgotten," it said. "You shouldn't have left." Aiden stepped forward, trembling. "What are you?" "I am what remains of you," the figure replied. "We were one. The builders, the travelers, the keepers of the worlds. But when the fall came, you sealed us away to protect what was left of humanity. Now the time has come to awaken the rest." Lyra's voice shook. "You mean the one buried under Earth?" The figure nodded. "It holds your origin, your memory. When both are joined, humanity will remember who they were meant to be." "But it will destroy the planet," Aiden shouted. The figure's expression didn't change. "This planet was never meant to be the end. It was only a beginning." Outside, the second carrier began to rise, tearing through the oceans and crust. The ground split open for hundreds of miles. Cities crumbled, skies burned with light. Every sensor on the station screamed overload. Inside the ship, alarms blared as systems reached critical levels. Aiden turned to Lyra, desperation in his eyes. "We have to stop it. There's got to be a way to break the connection." But as they ran toward the control spire, the figure's voice followed them. "You cannot stop what you are. You can only remember." The deck trembled beneath their feet. The sound of the two carriers sinking filled the air, a deep, resonant hum that made the entire ship shake. Lyra grabbed Aiden's hand as they reached the core's control panel. Energy flared around them, blinding light flooding the room. "If we fail," she said, "what happens?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because in that final moment, he wasn't sure if failure meant the end of humanity or the rebirth of something far greater. And then, through the roaring light and rising chaos, the two carriers aligned perfectly. The signal peaked, the pulse became deafening, the world held its breath, and everything went white. The light was blinding. It consumed everything, the ship, the sky, even the stars themselves. For a moment, there was no sound, no time, no sense of what was real. Then, slowly, the light faded, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any noise could ever be. Aiden woke on the floor of the carrier's core chamber. His vision was hazy, the air thick with static. The walls around him glowed faintly, pulsing with a slower rhythm now, like a heartbeat that had begun to calm. Lyra was beside him, unconscious but breathing. Everything else was quiet. Too quiet. He sat up trying to steady himself. The hum that had filled the ship moments ago was gone, replaced by a low vibration deep beneath the surface. For the first time, the carrier felt still, but that stillness wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Outside, Earth was unrecognizable. Half the planet was shrouded in clouds of energy that pulsed with strange light. The oceans glowed faintly, patterns of movement visible beneath the surface. The second carrier, the one that had risen from beneath the planet, now hovered beside its twin, their vast silhouettes locked in silent alignment. The world's gravitational field was twisting around them like fabric stretched too tight. Lyra stirred, groaning softly as she pushed herself up. "Are we still alive?" "I think so," Aiden said, though he wasn't sure what alive even meant anymore. Their instruments were dead, their suits flickering, but they could still breathe. The air inside the carrier seemed to sustain itself. Lyra looked around the glowing chamber, her voice trembling. "Did we stop it?" Before Aiden could answer, a voice echoed through the room, the same calm, familiar tone as before, but softer now, almost human. "You have not stopped anything. You have only begun what must be finished." The figure returned, emerging from the light at the center of the chamber, but this time it didn't look entirely solid. Its outline shimmered, splitting into two shapes for a fraction of a second before reforming. It looked unstable. "What's happening to you?" Aiden asked. The figure tilted its head slightly. "Two halves are merging, memory and matter. The carriers were designed to restore what was lost, but the restoration is incomplete. There is something missing." "Missing?" Lyra repeated. "What do you mean?" "The signal was meant to awaken not just the ships," it said, its voice now layered with echoes, "but the consciousness that created them, the collective you once were. But humanity has changed. You've rewritten yourselves. The resonance cannot complete without the original code." Aiden's stomach tightened. "You mean us?" The figure nodded. "Every human carries a fragment of what was lost. That is why you feel the call. That is why some of you dream." Lyra shook her head. "So the signal, it's not summoning something from space. It's trying to awaken something inside us?" "Yes," the figure said, "but it is not reaching all of you. The longer the sequence continues, the more unstable your world will become." Outside, the ships began to shift again, the space between them sparking with blinding energy. The two carriers were fusing, physically merging into a single colossal structure. Waves of light radiated outward, rippling across the atmosphere. On the planet below, entire coastlines shimmered as gravity faltered. Lyra grabbed the edge of the console. "It's tearing the Earth apart." The figure turned toward the window, its voice almost mournful. This world was never meant to hold such power. It was a cradle. Nothing more. Iden stepped forward, anger breaking through his fear. "You're destroying billions of lives." The figure looked back at him, eyes glowing faintly. "You misunderstand. I am not destroying. I am revealing. Humanity was not born here. You were placed here, to begin again. We built the carriers to preserve your kind after the fall of the first worlds. You were meant to awaken when the stars called you home. But you forgot who you were." The words hit like thunder. Iden felt his mind spinning. Everything humanity had believed about its history, its origin, it was all wrong. Earth wasn't humanity's birthplace, it was its refuge. Lyra stared out the window at the chaos spreading across the skies. "If what you're saying is true," she said quietly, "then the carriers aren't just ships. They're memory. They're us." The figure's form flickered again, distorting. "And that memory is breaking." Suddenly, alarms blared through the chamber, real mechanical alarms this time. Energy readings spiked across every display. The fusion between the two carriers was destabilizing. Iden ran to the console, frantically scanning the data. "The merge isn't holding. The cores are out of sync." "Then we separate them," Lyra said, already reaching for the controls. He shook his head. "If we separate them now, the energy release could vaporize half the planet." Before they could decide, the voice spoke again, but now it was fractured, distorted by static. "There is another way." The figure's image broke apart, scattering into fragments of light that swirled around them like fireflies. "There is still one last core, hidden below, the true seed. If it awakens, it will stabilize the merge. But if it remains dormant, all will collapse." Lyra turned sharply. "A third one? Where?" The light pulsed faster, flickering through the air. "At the center. Deep within your world. You called it myth, but it was always real. The Ark sleeps in the heart of your planet." Iden froze. "The Ark? The vessel that carried the first of you to this world," the voice said. "It contains what remains of your origin, your true DNA, your memories, your history. It was buried to protect it from yourselves. But now it must rise, or everything will fall." Before they could respond, the chamber shook violently. A surge of light burst through the walls, throwing them both to the floor. Outside, the two carriers roared with energy, lightning striking across their hulls as if the sky itself was shattering. The ship's systems began to fail, panels cracked, lights dimmed, the floor split beneath them. Lyra tried to pull Iden to his feet, but the gravity shifted violently, tossing them toward the window. Through the glass, they saw the Earth itself beginning to fracture, massive fissures glowing with molten light as something deep below began to move. The voice returned one last time, fading in and out through the static. "The Ark is awakening. Find it, before the others do." Then the light vanished completely. The chamber went dark. When Iden opened his eyes again, he and Lyra were lying in the wreckage of their shuttle on a ruined coastline. The sky was red with fire, the air thick with ash. Above them, the carriers still floated, but now their light was dim, as if they were dying. The world was changing fast. The rifts that had once shimmered harmlessly in the air now stretched wide enough to swallow entire cities. Through them, glimpses of other worlds appeared. Strange landscapes, alien skies, ruins of civilizations that looked eerily familiar. And in the distance, Far beyond the burning horizon, something massive was rising from the depths of the planet. It wasn't just another ship. It was far larger, ancient, covered in layers of stone and metal, shaped like a colossal ring spiraling toward the clouds. The Ark. Aiden could barely breathe as he stared at it. "It's real," he whispered. Lyra's voice was quiet, filled with awe and dread. "If that thing wakes up, it won't just change the Earth. It'll change everything." Above them, the carriers began to move again, as though answering a call only they could hear. The clouds split open with a flash of light, and the air vibrated with that familiar, haunting pulse. It wasn't over. It was only beginning. And as the Ark continued to rise, its surface glowing with the same patterns as the carriers, Aiden finally understood the truth that the universe had been trying to tell them all along. Humanity hadn't been waiting for contact. Humanity had been waiting to remember. The ground trembled as the Ark continued to rise from the Earth's crust, molten rock spilling into the oceans and turning entire coastlines into rivers of light. The sky above was alive with lightning and dust, and the two colossal carriers still hovered like silent witnesses to something beyond human understanding. Aiden and Lyra stood at the edge of a fractured cliff, staring at the impossible shape forming in the distance. The Ark wasn't just a ship. It was a city, a world, a memory made solid. Its surface shifted like a living thing, ancient patterns glowing brighter with each passing second. Aiden could feel it in his chest. The pulse, the same rhythm that had haunted him since the day the first carrier appeared. It was stronger now, almost overwhelming, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. "It's calling us," he said quietly, barely able to hear his own voice over the roaring wind. Lyra nodded. "Then we go to it." They salvaged what little remained of their shuttle's power core and began the journey toward the rising structure. The world around them was collapsing. Cities vanished beneath waves, the air thickened with ash, and every step felt like walking through the last breath of a dying planet. Yet somewhere deep inside, neither of them felt fear anymore. What they felt was a strange, aching recognition, like they had done this before. Hours later, as they reached the edge of a glowing chasm that circled the Ark's base, a familiar voice broke through the static of their damaged comms. "You should not have come here." The figure appeared once again, now fractured and flickering, standing amid the shifting light. But something had changed. Its tone wasn't calm anymore. It sounded strained, almost desperate. "You lied to us," Lyra said, her voice trembling but firm. "You said the Ark would save us." "I did not lie," the figure replied, the distortion in its voice making it sound like two people speaking at once. "The Ark will preserve humanity, but preservation and survival are not the same." Aiden took a cautious step forward. "What are you saying?" The figure's form wavered, splitting briefly into two outlines before merging again. "The Ark's awakening requires a source, something to bind the memories of the first worlds to the new. The human race must be integrated to continue." Lyra's eyes widened. "You mean merged? With what?" "With yourselves," the figure said. "With who you once were. The human genome carries fragments of the old design. The Ark will restore it, reconnect you to what you were before Earth. But the process cannot distinguish between old and new. Once it begins, there will be no Earth left as you know it, no boundaries between then and now." Aiden's stomach turned cold. "You're saying it'll erase everything, our history, our lives." The figure's voice softened. "Not erase. Evolve." A massive tremor shook the ground. From the base of the Ark, beams of energy shot outward, striking the carriers above. The sky flared white, and suddenly the hum returned, deeper and louder than ever. The carriers began to align in orbit, forming a massive ring of light that circled the planet. The air shimmered with energy, and every device still working began to pulse in unison. Lyra clutched her head, wincing. "It's inside me. It's in all of us." Aiden felt it too, like a second heartbeat syncing with his own. "We have to stop it. If it completes, there'll be nothing left of us." The figure looked at them both, its glowing eyes dimming. "You can stop it, but only if one of you takes control of the Ark's core. Human consciousness can rewrite the sequence, but it will require sacrifice." Lyra looked at Aiden, and in that instant he knew she was already thinking what he was. The Ark pulsed again, and a massive spire began to open at its center, revealing a stairway of light leading into the heart of the structure. Without another word, they ran. The climb was endless. The Ark was alive beneath their feet, shifting with each pulse of energy. Memories not their own flickered at the edges of their vision. Vast cities under alien suns, oceans made of silver, voices speaking in languages older than stars. It was all part of them now, flooding their minds as they approached the core. When they reached the top, the heart of the Ark loomed before them, a sphere of light suspended in the air, rotating slowly, covered in shifting patterns that looked like DNA made of starlight. The air vibrated with energy. Lyra reached for it, but Aiden grabbed her hand. "Wait!" She turned to him, tears glinting in her eyes. "If one of us doesn't do this, Earth ends here. You know that." "I can't let you—" She shook her head, smiling faintly. "It's not about letting. It's about finishing what we started." Before he could stop her, she broke free and stepped into the light. The moment she touched the core, the entire Ark came alive. The light expanded outward, engulfing everything. Aiden was thrown back, his vision dissolving into a storm of colors and sound. He heard her voice one last time, calm and steady through the chaos. "Remember who we are." Then silence. The next thing he knew, he was standing on a quiet plain, under a blue sky. The air was warm, the ground was green. For a moment, he thought it was Earth, but it wasn't. The stars above were wrong, brighter and closer. The Ark stood in the distance, now dormant and whole. The carriers were gone. He turned slowly, searching for Lyra, but she wasn't there. Her voice echoed faintly in his mind. "Aiden, look." He turned toward the horizon. Cities were rising from the ground, vast, beautiful, unlike anything human hands had built before. But they felt familiar, as if they'd always been part of humanity's dreams. The people who emerged from the light looked human, but different, stronger, clearer, their eyes carrying a faint glow. It dawned on him then. The Ark had done what it was meant to do. It had saved humanity, not by preserving it, but by transforming it. They were the next step, but the peace didn't last. As Aiden walked toward the nearest city, he noticed something strange in the air, a faint distortion, like a shimmer in space. Then he heard it, the hum, fainter, but still there, buried beneath the wind. He froze. No, it can't be. The sky darkened slightly, and above the horizon, a shadow began to form, massive, circular, familiar. Another ship, not one of the carriers, not the Ark. Something else. A cold realization washed over him. They heard it. The voice that had once guided them whispered softly in his head, faint and distant now. "The universe remembers." He looked up, his heart pounding. The stars shifted as the shadow grew larger, its outline unlike anything he had seen before. It wasn't human, and it wasn't from the first worlds. It was something new, drawn by the signal that had awakened the Ark. Lyra's voice returned one last time, softer now, like a memory. "It was never just about Earth, Aiden. It was about who would answer." He stared at the sky, watching as the shape descended, the light from the new world reflecting off its surface. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. A reminder that even when one story ends, another begins. The hum rose again, steady and powerful, echoing across the reborn world. Iden smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "Then let's see who remembers us." The wind carried his words into the distance as the shadow above split open, revealing a light brighter than anything the new sun could offer. The universe had heard Earth's call, and now something vast and unknown was answering. The story of humanity wasn't over. It had just begun again. The light from the sky grew softer, no longer blinding but warm, almost golden. It spread across the new world like dawn breaking for the first time. Iden stood on the edge of a grassy ridge overlooking what had once been chaos and ruin. Now it was something else. Life was returning, trees swaying gently in the wind, rivers running clear, cities of silver and glass rising from the ground where old continents had fallen. It didn't feel like Earth, but it felt right, like home somehow. He still heard the hum sometimes, though it was faint now, buried deep beneath the sound of wind and water. It wasn't frightening anymore. It felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that this new world, this new beginning, was alive. The Ark stood silent in the distance, its massive frame half buried in the plains, its light dimmed but never gone. It had done its job. Humanity had been reborn. In the weeks that followed, Iden walked among the people who had emerged from the light. They looked human, spoke with familiar voices, and carried the same spark of wonder. But there was something else, too. They moved with a sense of purpose, as if they could still feel the echoes of the worlds that came before. Some of them remembered flashes, images of old cities, the sound of oceans, the sight of the stars as they used to be. Others only felt it in dreams. They called it the memory tide. One evening, Iden sat on a hillside as the twin moons rose, their light reflecting off the Ark's metallic skin. Lyra's voice still lingered in his mind, gentle and clear, like a melody that never faded. He often caught himself speaking to her, knowing she wouldn't answer in words but somehow still listening. The people had begun to call her the Keeper of Light. They said she was the one who guided the transformation, the one who made the sacrifice so they could live again. Iden didn't correct them. He knew they were right. As he gazed at the stars, a group of children ran past him, laughing. One of them stopped and looked up at him curiously. "Is it true," she asked, "that the stars used to be far away?" Iden smiled faintly. "They still are, but now, maybe they're a little closer than before." The girl nodded as if she understood more than she should have, then ran to join the others. Watching her, Iden felt something he hadn't felt since before the carriers appeared. Hope. Real, steady hope. But that hope was mixed with something else, too. The shadow that had appeared in the sky during the Ark's awakening had not vanished. It remained in orbit, distant, yet unmistakable. A vessel unlike any human creation. It hadn't attacked. It hadn't spoken. It simply watched. Sometimes at night, its faint outline could be seen among the stars, and the people whispered about it, some with fear, others with curiosity. Iden had gone out to the edge of the Great Plains once, where the hum of the Ark was strongest, and tried to communicate. The Ark responded with faint pulses of light, as if acknowledging him, but the shadow above never answered. He began to realize something. The signal that awakened the Ark, that remade humanity, wasn't just a message. It was an invitation. The universe had heard Earth's echo, and now others were listening. Days turned into months, and the new civilization began to take shape. The people learned quickly, as though knowledge came to them instinctively. Energy flowed from the Ark's core, powering everything from the floating farms that grew beneath the rivers to the ships that began to explore the surrounding lands. They called their world Haven, a name that felt both new and ancient. One night, as Iden walked along the shore of a glowing sea, he heard the hum again. But this time, it carried a rhythm he didn't recognize. It wasn't from the ark. It came from the sky. He looked up and saw a beam of faint blue light descending from the orbiting shadow. It touched the surface of the ocean far away, creating ripples of energy that shimmered like liquid starlight. He ran toward the cliffs overlooking the impact point, the wind howling around him. When he reached the top, he saw something rising from the water, a small craft, sleek and translucent, its surface covered in shifting patterns like those on the ark. It hovered silently before lowering itself onto the shore. The door opened, and a figure stepped out. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely alien either. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its movements were calm, deliberate. When it spoke, the voice was soft, almost familiar. "You have awakened the seed. We felt its return." Aiden took a cautious step forward. "Who are you?" "We are the ones who came before you," the being said. "We left the carriers, the ark, and your world to sleep, hoping that one day you would find your way back. You have done more than we ever could." Aiden's chest tightened. "Then why are you here now?" "To see if you are ready," it said. "The awakening has sent ripples far beyond this system. Others have heard it too, beings who remember the first worlds as we do, and those who do not. Some will seek peace, others may not." "So this isn't over?" Aiden asked quietly. The being smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Nothing that begins with life ever truly ends. But this time, you are not the ones who must hide. You are the ones who must lead." Before he could speak again, the figure turned back toward the craft. "The universe is listening once more. Do not let silence fall again." The door closed and the craft lifted into the air, vanishing into the night sky like a shooting star. Aiden stood there for a long time, staring at the waves, the hum of the ark faintly echoing behind him. The world was quiet again, but the meaning of that silence had changed. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was possibility. When he returned to the city, he gathered the council, the new leaders who had formed to guide humanity's rebirth, and told them what he had seen. They listened in awe, their faces reflecting the light from the glowing horizon. No one spoke for a long time. Then one of them, a young man born after the awakening, said softly, "Then we have a choice. We can stay here or we can answer." Aiden nodded slowly. "Lyra once said that remembering who we are was only the beginning. Maybe she was right. Maybe now we decide who we become." The following morning, the ark stirred once more. The skies glowed with gentle light as new ships, smaller than the carriers, but made from the same shimmering material, rose from its surface. They hovered above the plains, waiting. The hum spread across the world again, steady and strong, not as a warning, but as a song. People gathered to watch as Aiden stepped forward, placing his hand on the side of the nearest ship. It opened for him, welcoming him like an old friend. He looked up at the stars, where the faint outline of the mysterious vessel still watched and smiled. "Let's find out who else remembers." The engines roared softly, lifting him into the air. One by one, the other ships followed, forming a spiral of light that stretched upward into the sky. The people below watched in silence, their faces filled with awe and quiet pride. As Aiden's ship broke through the clouds, he felt the hum surround him once more, not as a sound this time, but as a feeling. It wasn't fear. It wasn't duty. It was belonging. Humanity was no longer lost. It had found its place among the stars again. Below, the new world of Haven glowed with life, the ark's pulse steady and bright. Above, the universe waited, vast, mysterious, and full of stories yet to be told. And somewhere, carried on the light between worlds, Lyra's voice whispered through the hum one last time, "Welcome home." The signal faded into the stars, leaving only silence, and the promise of what was still to come.